But we did talk about the law of four. You have recollection of this?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
The law of four, from a certain standpoint, doesn't exist. What it is when two separate aspects of the law of two cross paths. Okay, and so you've got, in this example, you've got hot, which I'll just stick with the examples that we've used in the past, and cold. Okay, those are two ends to the bar. And we said hot and cold are just relative values of the amount of molecular movement in something, really. It's hot and cold is. It's not like it exists by itself. Nothing is hot or cold. It's always in relation to something else, isn't it? Yeah. And then we'll stick with the same example. You've got wet and dry. In the universe somewhere, this bar of hot and cold cross paths with the bar of wet and dry. And wet and dry is just the amount of shear force it takes to separate it from itself. Shear force, like you take a bit of coal, since we've already used that example, crack it with a hammer, it's going to shear easily because it lacks wetness. You do the same thing with water, and it'll splash and it'll come right back to itself. It has no shear point. Whatever you pour it into, it's going to assume that position. Whereas if you try and jam a rock that's too big for a glass, yeah, into it, it is going to break the glass. And that is actually a pretty good example because glass is actually considered a fluid, but it has a much higher shear point. So it would be more towards the dry end of the fluid than, say, water. You see, these things are relative. But anytime the law of two crosses the law of two, you get what's called the law of four. Right? And it has certain effects with itself. And so hot and dry, let's use it in classical Cornelius Agrippa terms, okay? Or classical alchemy, if you prefer. Hot and dry, you get fire. Dry and cold, earth. Wet and cold, water. And wet and hot, you've got air. Okay. These are the classical elements. And really, right in the middle, if they're all balanced, you get the quintessence, all five coming together, which we, as human beings, should be more of a quintessence than a hot, cold, wet, dry type of phenomenon, or air, earth, water, fire type of phenomenon. Because we're pentagrammic. That's what quintessence means. It means five-ish, five-fold. I'm going somewhere with this, having to do with the soul. Okay, this is why the soul and the spirit, I should say, because I think it's still important to get a better foundation than just looking internally. You'll get some of these ideas that you've been exposed to, but perhaps don't have the foundation for. Right? Is that acceptable? Okay. You've heard things like bull, bird, lion, and serpent, haven't you? Or sometimes man, they say. Don't they?
Yes.
Yeah.
Either bull, bird, lion, and serpent, or bull, bird, lion, and man. We'll get to the reason why in that, and then you can go, all right, makes sense. Let's put them here. Bull. What would you say? Air, earth, water, fire.
Earth.
You got it. Say bull here. Bird. That one's pretty obvious.
Air.
Air. Yep. Lion.
Fire.
And water, obviously, serpent. Or human. Do you know what the word human means?
Man.
Kind of, yeah. Or humor comes from human. It's an aspect of human. It just means wet being. We're mostly water, like humidity, those sorts of things.
Right.
Yeah, we're wet beings. So here's part of the clue to this. Why human is sometimes serpent, or sometimes because it's related to the water element. All right, so we're going to add charges to things. Hot, obviously, positive. Cold, negative. Wet, negative. And dry, positive. Now, I want you to begin to see something. In this quadrant where you've got lion and fire, you have two positive influences, right? So it's plus sign and plus sign, isn't it? Hot and dry for this vector, this third vector of fire. Now, in dry and cold, you've got positive and negative. In cold and wet, you've got negative and negative. That's what produces water and serpent and human. And then in the air vector, you've got negative and positive. There's one. You understand where I'm going so far? You've
Yes.
got these various forces, okay? Now, in this quadrant down here below the wet dry line, this would be where the physical body comes from, where the cloak or the soul and the spirit comes from. Right? Because now we're talking about higher and lower aspects to something, not necessarily the aspect of, well, if you want to get technical, let's get technical. The earth would be the physical body, and this aspect over here, the water serpent, would be the etheric body. You know your etheric body? Do you know what that is? Probably all played around with this where you can kind of feel, yeah. Take your hand, let's do it. All right. Take your hand kind of away from your arm for a minute, and then bring it in, and you'll feel this kind of point where there's a little bit of a tingle and pressure, and it almost gets thicker. That's your etheric. If you want to get specific, it's composed of hydrogen 96. If you really want to build it up, you can actually gather it in your hands. Let's get practical, shall we? Take your hands like this, a couple of cups, and preferably either in front of your eyes or in front of your throat, okay? Because that's where a lot of radiation comes from. And begin to bring them together slowly, focusing on the space in between. Like you're packing a ball, okay? You can kind of like pack it in. Leave it there, bring them out again. So it might have started off like a golf ball, and then you get to like a tennis ball where you start to feel that pressure again. Leave it there. Pack it in again. You can get to this, you begin to develop this energy here. And really, if you're sitting next to somebody, go ahead and trade it off with them. You know? Get this ball of energy, put it in one of your hands, and give it to them, and see if they can feel it. But that's a way to actually gather and collect etheric force from your etheric layer. So your physical aspect has to do with your body and your etheric region of your aura. Hydrogen 96 that we've talked about before, and we will get there, why things are called hydrogens and whatnot, but hydrogen 96 is what's composed of your etheric. Okay, anything lower than that, like hydrogen 384, water, hydrogen 192, air. These are things that scientists can measure, but once you get up to hydrogen 96, you get things like thermals. To begin with, the low end of hydrogen 96 is your thermal radiation, heat that comes off your body. And the higher end really has to do with things like the frequency that hormones generate, not the hormones themselves, because those are physical, but the frequency hormones generate, as well as certain aspects of the beginnings of healing force. If you're the kind of person that goes outside and gets eaten alive by mosquitoes, you may not have enough hydrogen 96. You may not have enough density in your etheric region, because that will actually repel them. You see, they don't like to get in there because it has the effect of almost electrocuting them, if you will. Or you can get it very strong. Okay. So that's a physical aspect, because you can at least measure the lower end of it, which is heat.